going to show you the exact method that thousands of type 1s have used to normalize their blood sugar, starting off with small corrections. So this is something that a lot of type 1s get wrong because they think the amount of insulin that they take doesn't really matter. The problem is the more insulin you're taking, the less predictable it is. So that means if you're taking like 20 units at a time, it's really hard to know the effect that that insulin is going to have. And for the most part, it becomes less effective the more you take at once. For example, if you were to take 10 units all at once, it would be less predictable than if you were to take 1 unit about an hour apart 10 times. And to be clear, I don't mean to just go out and cut all your doses in half. That's not going to go well, obviously. What that does mean is you want to raise your insulin sensitivity and lower your insulin demand. Now, the two big ways to do this is actually exercise, and then it's going to be your diet. Feels like everything comes back to those two, right? These are the two things that are really going to affect how much insulin you're taking. Exercise, it decreases your insulin resistance, which means you can take less. Now, diet, obviously, when you're eating carbs and protein, those both demand insulin. Fat, not so much. It has other effects on how your body breaks down food, but fat doesn't directly need insulin to be digested, which is really interesting. But both of the other macromolecules, those do, carbs and protein. However, it's interesting to note protein requires less insulin because fundamentally there's less glucose in it. However, when you look at the insulin release in a non-obese, non-diabetic person, for carbohydrates, it's going to be a quick spike and then it'll come down. And for protein, it's a small rise, which is good to know. And another important part about diet is it actually affects weight quite a bit. And obesity in particular raises your insulin resistance through the roof, which increases your insulin demand, which obviously we don't want. But also if you get your diet right, your body weight is going to be ideal. Which leads to much better insulin sensitivity, which is what we're going for. Basically, by messing with these two factors, you can just jack your insulin sensitivity through the roof and also decrease your insulin demand. If you're interested, by the way, this all comes straight from Dr. Bernstein. His book is online. I highly suggest you read it. It's really amazing. All right, the second part of this method is actually going to be low carb. And I don't mean in the traditional super rigid sense of just cutting carbs. However, that does work super well for a lot of type 1s, but I don't want to be that black and white. So if you were to look at the carbs that you're eating, 80% of them is going to be junk, and then 20% is going to be like veggies. So if you can just eliminate this junk, which I know it's 80% and it's going to be the hardest part to eliminate, but if you can get rid of the junk and focus mainly on getting your carbohydrates from vegetables, you're going to notice that your blood sugar just naturally kind of comes down because you're not seeing those massive spikes, which don't demand the massive amounts of insulin, which doesn't lead to the roller coaster. So overall, if you can just eliminate this junk and make your carbohydrate intake predominantly vegetables or slower acting carbs, that's going to have incredible effects on your blood sugar. So a really good rule of thumb, and this isn't applicable for everyone, but a great rule of thumb is 6-12-12. And this is grams of carbs per meal per day. So you want 6 at breakfast, 12 at lunch, 12 at dinner. Now, the reason that we're at 6 for breakfast is because your blood sugar is way more unstable when you wake up. It's also way more important that you're stable because if you're stable in the morning, you're going to be stable throughout the day. So getting your morning right is super important, more so than any other time of the day. So you can kind of loosen up throughout the day, but being super tight on that breakfast is important. Again, this is way more strict than most people are willing to go, which is completely okay, but this is kind of an ideal for if you want just super tight control of your blood sugar, reducing those carbs down to 6-12-12, like it's gonna have incredible effects on your blood sugar. You're gonna notice that you're way more stable, that your insulin demands come down, that your weight stabilizes typically, not always. Great rule of thumb here. And to give you a story to really drive this home, I had one of my buddies, he came in and his A1C was, I think, 9.4. His time in range was 45%. It was really bad. I kind of sat down with him for about an hour and we looked through what he was eating. And he was having 80 plus grams of carbs per day. And I kind of sat down and I worked it out with him where we could get it down to around 30 per day. And in literally a week, he doubled his time in range. So that just goes to show how impactful low carb can really be on your blood sugar, especially when you do it right. And also you can incorporate carbs in a productive manner that doesn't get you on the roller coaster, which is primarily what we want to avoid. Like the ups and downs is what we want to avoid. If you're level, it doesn't really matter how you get there. Everything I'm talking about right now is just going to help you get to that stage where your blood sugar is nice and level and you don't see any of those massive spikes. You don't have to take huge amounts of insulin to correct for it. Which is just going to lead to overall better management. All right, now on to point 3, our insulin. So a lot of type 1s haven't even heard what our insulin is, and some type 1s that have used it have had really bad allergic reactions to it. So obviously, if you're allergic to it, don't use it. But for those of you who aren't allergic and think that this could be useful, talk to your doctor because this is a massive breakthrough for a lot of people. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but protein affects your blood sugar a lot slower than carbohydrate does. So if you were to look at the insulin release in a normal non-diabetic person for protein, it would look a little bit like this. And this is about 30 minutes after eating, and then here is about 5 hours. Now, as you can see, the release is a lot slower than the action profile of carbohydrates. Carbs start raising your blood sugar after about 15 minutes, and they're almost out of your system in about an hour, which requires that faster acting insulin. So our insulin is a slower acting insulin that matches this peak that you would normally see in a non-diabetic, but it replicates that in type 1s. When you start reducing your carbohydrate intake, you typically start increasing your protein intake, which is a good trade-off. It leads to much more level blood sugars, which is hopefully what we're all going for here. But a problem is you will see that your level for about 2 hours after because you just took insulin, but then about 3 hours after eating a meal, a low carb meal, you'll start to go high and you don't really know why because you haven't eaten in a while. But the thing is, protein is raising your blood sugar. It just works slower than carbohydrate. And our insulin helps a lot. Like, it's really, really cool to see. Our insulin just helps match that peak. So your blood sugar never really rises and you just stay nice and level after eating, which of course is what we're going for. Now, this is also sold over the counter. You can find it at Walmart. You can also get a prescription for it, so your insurance will cover it, hopefully. You know how insurance is. But this, if you haven't heard about it, definitely bring it up to your endo. Again, if you're allergic to it, no worries. You can make this happen with fast-acting insulin. Now, to do that, because protein works in your body for longer, you typically have to take 2 doses of fast acting, which is gonna look, if you were to track the insulin in your blood, it would look a little bit like this. And that'll help keep your blood sugar nice and level from protein. I do this sometimes, especially when I'm like traveling and I don't necessarily have my R on me. I'll just cover with fast acting, and you're also gonna want these doses to be pretty small so you don't go low. So you can do it with fast acting, but just in my opinion, it's a lot simpler to use R, and it matches that spike a lot better than doing 2 doses. All right, now on to the last point, and it's the law of small numbers. Again, this is coming directly from Dr. Bernstein. He spent his life researching this, and he had an immense impact on thousands of type 1s. So the law of small numbers, it just means if you make a small input, you'll get a small output, which sometimes is bad, sometimes most of the time is good. If you were to take 1 unit of insulin right now, you would probably go low, but you wouldn't go that low. Now, if you were to take 10 units, you'd go really low. So basically just extrapolating that out leads to the law of small numbers, where you want to take as little action as possible to get the outcome. You don't want to have these massive rises and these massive falls. You want it to just be a nice level line all day long. And this goes back to low carb because it reduces the amount of variables and it leads to more stable blood sugar. It goes back to the smaller doses of insulin. It leads to more level blood sugar. But also things like exercise, you're getting your diet right, getting your sleep right, getting enough water. These all feed into the law of small numbers. The less you can take, the better. But the amazing part is when you have very few inputs, you have a very specific output. And that means that you can predict it. And if you can predict the outcome, you can change the inputs to manipulate the outcome. I think the number one pitfall for type 1 diabetics is actually the roller coaster, because once you get on it, it is incredibly hard to get off, and it leads to these massive fluctuations in blood sugar, and it raises your A1C, it makes you feel like crap, and it's also dangerous, and it leads to these terrible health outcomes that a lot of type 1s experience. The law of small numbers is designed to counteract that. Instead of taking 5 units of insulin, why don't you just try 2, and then if in 2 hours you're still high, take another 2. Instead of giving 5 now, because if you give 5 now, you might go low. And if you go low, you're probably gonna overcorrect again. So this is designed to fix that overcorrection. And fundamentally, if you don't overcorrect at all, if you are perfect, if every time that you eat sugar to fix a low, and every time that you take insulin to correct a high, if that's perfect, you'll be level. So if you're level, then you can just adjust to get down to the range that you want. And that's fundamentally what the law of small numbers is talking about, is control the input, control the output. And if you're able to do that, you're able to control your blood sugar. When you lower all of the inputs, you reduce the variability, and that just makes it more predictable. It takes the guesswork out of it. It makes your life way easier if you're dealing with smaller numbers, which again, that's what this is talking about. That's what Dr. Bernstein discovered, that if he was taking massive doses of insulin, massive carbohydrate heavy meals, that he was unable to predict the outcome. Now, if he did the opposite, if he took small, precise doses of insulin, with small amounts of carbs and high amounts of protein that he could predict the outcome almost perfectly. And that's fundamentally what I base my management off of. Like, this is at the bottom of a lot of type 1's management, even if they don't know it. So just acknowledging it and focusing on getting those numbers as small as you can manage, it just leads to much more stable blood sugar. The results from this are genuinely incredible. I run all of my members in my community through this, and the results is an average A1C in the community of 5.75%. That is about 3 whole points below the national average. And again, this is the cheat sheet of what I run them through. Now, how I do it, I didn't really get into that, but this is fundamentally how I get those insane results in my community. And also online, there's hundreds of type 1s that share their experience doing essentially this and getting the exact same results, normal blood sugar. This is exactly what Dr. Bernstein taught, which helps thousands of type 1s normalize their blood sugar. So it works, it has worked, and hopefully it'll work for you. All right, now I know what you're thinking, like, what does this mean for me? Now, typically what I see, especially with new type 1 diabetics, is they need to focus on getting their carb intake down. Now, if you're eating like 40 grams of carbs per day, it's not a big deal. Now, also the source of your carbs does matter a lot. If that's 40 grams from cake, then you're gonna see a massive spike from that. But if it's from vegetables, then you're gonna have nice and stable blood sugar. So getting your carb intake down, for most people, again, this is super generalized, but for most people, this is the first step right here. And you're gonna wanna screenshot this, write it down, put it in your notes, drill it into your brain. You're gonna wanna remember this. Focus on getting your carbs down. This is going to lead to more stable blood sugar. And once your blood sugar is more stable, you can start making those other changes and you can see clearly what it's doing to your blood sugar, which just allows this unimaginably tight control of your blood sugar, which is what we're going for. So focus primarily on carb intake. That's the first step. Second step, once you start getting your carb intake down, is going to be focusing on insulin. So once your carb intake starts coming down, you're going to want to adjust your insulin doses to match that reduction in carbs. And getting your insulin doses super precise is going to be how your blood sugar after eating is the exact same as before eating. Now, there's still going to be those wild cases where something unpredictable just happens and you're going to have to roll with the punches. Those never go away. But 80% of the time, you can predict the outcome after eating, and you can predict the outcome when you wake up. You can predict the outcome when you go to bed. You can just, it's like X-ray. Once your blood sugar is level and your insulin doses are precise, it's like X-ray. You can just see exactly what's going on. And once you know what's going on, you can fix it. So after insulin, you're gonna wanna start focusing on exercise. Now, so a lot of type 1s are actually rather insulin resistant, which is not what we want. So focusing on exercise helps increase your insulin sensitivity, which is a good thing, bringing your blood sugar down and also stabilizing it. So exercise is the third thing that most people focus on. And then the last thing you're gonna wanna focus on is just improvement. So once you get these two down and you're exercising, you're basically all the way there. Like that's 80-20 on this. It's just 1,000 golden BBs to get your A1C down that last little bit. Like you can get your A1C down to about 5.7 through just these 3, maybe even just these 2 if you get your insulin doses really, really precise. And then again, just adding in that exercise and then focusing on making tiny changes just about every single day to constantly correct and constantly improve is how you're gonna get from about 6% down to 5%. And this is what I see most often with the type 1s that I work with. And especially when you're new, this can be a great framework to start working on your carbs, then move on to insulin, then exercise, and then it's just improving. Not to say that this is easy, it's not. It is genuinely hard and it's gonna take years, especially trial and error for many, many of you. And a lot of you won't get there because diabetes is just hard. But these are the biggest takeaways that I have from working with a ton of type 1 diabetics. Hopefully you can take something away and apply it to your own situation. And if you want a more personalized look at where you are in this journey, I have a completely free personalized plan that will just kind of identify where you are in this journey and then give you a plan of where you are and then how to improve from there. It's took me forever to make and it's an awesome resource. So if you want to check that out, it's in the description. Again, completely for free, just to help you kind of get an idea of where to start and also where you're going. Now, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope this was useful. Apply this to your situation. Like look at this and think, where are you? Where do I need to start? And then start. That is the biggest thing, just starting. So I'll see y'all in the next one.